You might think having divorce papers thrown in your face during a neighborhood party is the absolute peak of humiliation. I actually smiled when he screamed that I had 24 hours to vacate this seaside mansion to make room for his amateur model. Derek had no idea that every brick beneath his feet and the legal trap my lawyer had already set were about to turn his arrogant performance into total financial ruin. My name is Veronica, and if there is one thing I have mastered in my 34 years, it is the art of risk assessment. As a senior analyst for the Orion Financial Group, I spent my days predicting disasters before they happened. But standing on the manicured lawn of our Harbor Point estate in Seattle, I was focused on a different kind of management. I was playing the role of the perfect hostess at our annual summer block party. The air smelled of sea salt and expensive catering. Around me, the neighborhood elite mingled, holding flutes of champagne and wearing social masks so tight they looked painful. These were people who judged your worth by the year of your car and the pedigree of your dog. I moved through the crowd, ensuring Mrs. Miller had her drink refilled so she would stop asking prying questions, and nodding politely as Mr. Johnson, the head of the homeowner association, complained about the height of the hedges. The polite hum of conversation was shattered by the aggressive roar of an engine. All heads turned toward the driveway as a cherry-red sports car, brand new and obnoxiously loud, swerved in and crunched to a halt on the gravel. My husband, Derek, stepped out. At 38, he was a commercial real estate broker who had recently begun to believe his own inflated press. He adjusted his designer sunglasses and slammed the car door, ignoring the guests who had stopped talking to stare. He did not come to greet me. He did not apologize for being late. Instead, he walked with a swagger that screamed arrogance, marching directly toward the small wooden stage where the jazz trio was playing. He cut the music with a sharp, rude gesture to the band leader. The sudden silence was heavy and awkward. Derek grabbed the microphone, tapping it until a piercing feedback whine made everyone wince. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces of our neighbors before landing on me with a look of pure, unadulterated malice. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. With a theatrical motion, he hurled it onto the buffet table. It slid across the pristine white linen, knocking over a vase of hydrangeas before coming to rest in front of me. "I want everyone to witness this," Derek announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "Those are divorce papers. Veronica, you have exactly 24 hours to get your things and get out of my house." A collective gasp ripped through the yard. Before the shock could settle, the passenger door of the sports car opened. Sienna stepped out. She was 24 years old, a woman Derek had introduced to me months ago as an art curator. Today, she looked more like a trophy being unveiled. She smoothed down a dress that was far too revealing for a daytime gathering and walked toward the stage with a triumphant smirk. She climbed up next to Derek, linking her arm through his and resting her head on his shoulder, looking down at me like I was something unpleasant she had stepped in. The whispers began instantly. I could feel the eyes of the neighbors burning into me. I saw the pity on Mr. Johnson's face and the hungry excitement in Mrs. Miller's eyes. Derek continued his tirade, fueled by the audience. He told the crowd that he was finished carrying dead weight. He declared that I had been living off his success for years, that this mansion and this lifestyle were the results of his hard work, and he was finally reclaiming what was his to share with a woman who appreciated him. He stripped me of my dignity layer by layer, painting a picture of me as a leech while he played the benevolent king who had finally had enough. Most women would have broken down. Tears would have been the expected reaction, or perhaps a screaming match that would give the neighborhood gossip for a decade. But I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. I did not cry. I did not plead. I simply walked to the buffet table, picked up the envelope, and brushed a flower petal off the cover. I looked at my watch, noting the time. Then, I walked to the edge of the stage and looked up at him. I leaned in close, keeping my voice low and steady, intended only for him and his new conquest. I asked him simply if he was absolutely certain he wanted to play this hand publicly. Derek just laughed in my face, a cruel sound that echoed in the silence, and waved me away as if I were a pest. He had no idea that his victory lap was actually a funeral march. I turned on my heel and walked away from the garden, leaving the collective gasp of the neighborhood behind me. I did not run, and I certainly did not look back at the man standing on the stage or the young woman clinging to his arm. I walked through the French doors, into the cool sanctuary of the house, and went straight to my private study. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and I turned the brass deadbolt, effectively sealing out the noise, the heat, and the drama. Safe in the silence, my mind instantly shifted from the role of a wife to that of a senior risk analyst. I looked at the framed photograph on the desk, taken 8 years ago. We were so different then. Derek was a mid-level sales associate with a cheap polyester suit and a desperate need for approval. While I was already making a name for myself in financial forecasting, I had seen him as a low-risk investment with high potential yield, someone I could mold and elevate. How wrong the data had been on that particular projection. My eyes drifted to the mahogany-paneled walls of the study, the very walls Derek claimed were his. This house was the foundation of his arrogance, the physical proof of his self-proclaimed success. He truly believed that his commission bonus 5 years ago had covered the down payment on this estate. He believed that the $4,000 he transferred every month went to a national mortgage lender to build equity in our shared future. It was almost adorable how little he understood about the flow of capital. The truth was far more calculating, a secret I had kept hidden behind a wall of complex paperwork. I had purchased this property outright with a single wire transfer from the Sterling Trust, the massive inheritance left to me by my father, a brilliant but paranoid inventor who trusted no one. The mortgage lender Derek paid was nothing more than a shell company I controlled. For 5 years, my husband had not been paying a mortgage. He had been paying rent, and every single penny of it circled right back into my investment portfolio. He was a tenant in my kingdom, acting like the emperor. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I had hoped never to use in this capacity. Jameson Ford answered on the first ring. I kept the instruction brief and devoid of emotion. "Activate the landlord protocol," I said. Jameson did not ask questions or offer sympathy. He simply confirmed that the papers would be ready within the hour. Hanging up, I sat in my leather chair and allowed myself a moment to analyze the data of the last 6 months. The signs had been there, subtle shifts in the market of our marriage that I had noted but not yet acted upon. There were the unexplained business trips to cities that had no commercial real estate boom. There were the credit card statements I was not supposed to see, detailing purchases at luxury boutiques for items I never received. And then there was the sudden, obsessive interest in modern art. That was where Sienna came in. Derek had introduced her to me as a brilliant art advisor, a prodigy who could help him diversify his assets. She was guiding him toward investing in ugly, overpriced modern sculptures, promising him quick returns that defied market logic. I had suspected money laundering or a simple scam from the start, but Derek was intoxicated by the promise of easy wealth and refused to listen to my warnings. I woke my computer screen and typed in a password Derek did not know. While he knew about the exterior security cameras to protect his precious car, he was blissfully unaware of the internal surveillance system my father had insisted upon installing. I pulled up the footage from 3 days ago. There they were, Derek and Sienna, sitting on the very sofa I was looking at now. I watched the video in silence. Sienna was spinning a fantasy, telling Derek that she was the estranged daughter of a European real estate tycoon. She whispered that her father would only trust Derek with the family empire if he severed ties with his ordinary, middle-class wife. She painted me as the anchor dragging him down, the only obstacle preventing him from ascending to the ultra-wealthy elite. Derek drank it in, nodding like a bobblehead, agreeing that I was holding him back from his destiny. He thought he was discarding a burden. He thought he was trading up to a higher tax bracket. My calm demeanor outside was not shock. It was the confidence of a player who knows their opponent has misread the board entirely. Derek had never bothered to read the fine print of the documents he signed, and that laziness was about to cost him everything. I sat at my desk and cracked my knuckles, shifting instantly from the grieving wife to the forensic accountant. I pulled up the encrypted dashboard I used for high-level risk assessment at Orion and began to audit the last 6 months of my marriage. The numbers on the screen told a brutal story of stupidity and greed. I traced the withdrawals Derek had made from our joint savings, as well as the personal loans he had taken out based on his own credit score. It was a hemorrhage of cash. In just half a year, he had liquidated nearly $300,000. The transaction descriptions were vague, labeled simply as consulting fees or gallery acquisitions, but they all flowed into one offshore account that I knew Derek had no business accessing. I opened a new window and launched the proprietary background check software my firm reserved for vetting potential corporate mergers. I typed in the name Sienna. As I suspected, the woman outside drinking my champagne did not exist in any legitimate database. I ran a facial recognition search using a photo I had taken of her at the Christmas party months ago. The system pinged a match instantly. Her name was not Sienna, it was Sarah B., and she had a rap sheet in Florida longer than my arm. She was a professional grifter with a conviction record for selling forged paintings to retirees in Boca Raton. The pieces of the puzzle snapped together with terrifying logic. Sarah was not a curator. She was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme she called the Contemporary Art Investment Club. I dug deeper into the server logs she was carelessly using on unsecured public Wi-Fi. I found a list of recent investors. There was a prominent plastic surgeon named Dr. Evans and a 20-something CEO of a tech startup named Mark. They had all bought into her lie, purchasing shares in non-existent sculptures. But Derek was not just another mark on her list. He was the whale she had been hunting for years. I found the correspondence between them. Sienna had convinced Derek that the only way to legitimize their relationship and secure their financial empire was to turn my house into an exclusive, appointment-only art gallery. Derek, blinded by lust and ego, had swallowed the bait whole. He believed that by transferring the deed to her, they would save on taxes and protect the asset during our divorce. He was effectively trying to give away a mansion he did not own to a woman who was not real. I accessed Derek's personal email account, the password for which was laughably his birthday followed by his high school football jersey number. There it was. An email sent yesterday to his lawyer, a cheap strip mall attorney who barely passed the bar exam. Derek had attached a request to draft a unilateral property transfer, signing the house over to Sienna's shell company effective immediately upon my departure. But the attachment below that one made my blood run cold. It was a general financial power of attorney. Derek had signed away his right to make financial decisions, giving Sienna full control over his accounts to facilitate the investments. He had handed a convicted felon the keys to his entire life without even running a basic Google search. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. This was no longer just about a cheating husband and a messy divorce. This was a felony in progress. I realized I had a choice. I could simply evict them and let Derek ruin himself. Or I could use the information I had just uncovered to do something far more satisfying. I decided that protecting my assets was not enough. I was going to dismantle Sienna's entire operation and watch them both burn in the fires of their own making. The sun rose on what was supposed to be my final day in the house, but I was not packing my bags. I was building an army. I sat at the kitchen island with a pot of black coffee and the list of names I had scraped from Sienna's digital footprint. My first move was a calculated strike against her credibility. I drove into the city to meet Dr. Evans at a quiet coffee shop away from the prying eyes of our social circle. He was a distinguished plastic surgeon, but he looked like a man who had not slept in a week. Over a cup of tea, he confessed in a hushed voice that he had given Sienna $50,000 for what she claimed was a rare avant-garde sculpture. When he finally had it appraised by a legitimate auction house, it turned out to be painted plaster worth less than the shipping crate it arrived in. He was too ashamed to go to the police, terrified that the scandal would ruin his professional reputation. From my car. I initiated a video call with Mark, the young tech CEO on my list. He was pacing around his office, furious and desperate. He told me he was ready to sue Sienna into oblivion, but his lawyers had advised him against it. They said he did not have enough hard evidence to link her directly to the fraud, as she had used burner phones and encrypted messaging apps to conduct their business. I stopped him mid-rant. I told them both that filing individual lawsuits would just give her time to disappear with their money. I proposed a different strategy. I told them not to fight her in courtrooms she would never show up to. Instead, I invited them to my house that afternoon. I explained that we were going to catch her in the act, surrounded by the very lies she spun. I needed them to be the surprise witnesses in a trial I was convening in my living room. By noon, the legal artillery arrived. Jameson Ford entered through the service entrance, carrying a heavy leather briefcase that contained the nuclear option. Inside were the original property deeds, the impenetrable trust documents established by my father, and the ironclad prenup Derek had skimmed over years ago. Jameson placed the files on the marble counter and gave me a grim nod. Everything was in order. The front door slammed open an hour later. Derek breezed in, whistling a cheerful tune. He stopped dead when he saw the stack of cardboard boxes lining the hallway. He laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves, and told me he was glad to see I was finally being sensible and packing up my clutter. He had no idea those boxes were filled with his golf trophies and his designer suits, not my china. He told me to hurry up because he wanted the place spotless by 5 o'clock. I lowered my eyes, channeling every ounce of submission I could muster. I asked him softly if his art investments were really going to make him as rich as he claimed. The question fed his ego like gasoline. He puffed out his chest and bragged that they were on the verge of a deal that would put him in the history books. He said he was building a legacy, something a boring number cruncher like me could never understand. His phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Sienna, displayed clearly on the lock screen. She was demanding to know if the house was secured yet because she had a foreign investor flying in the next day and she needed the location to close the deal. She was already leveraging my living room to run her next scam before the body of our marriage was even cold. As soon as Derek went upstairs to shower, I moved through the house with purpose. I pulled out my tablet and synced it to the central home automation system. I programmed every smart television in the living room, the kitchen, and the library to mirror my device on command. I checked the connections one last time. The stage was set, the actors were assembling, and the audience was about to get a show they would never forget. The heavy tread of work boots on my hardwood floors signaled the beginning of the end. Derek had hired a discount moving company, a crew of 3 hulking men who looked like they specialized in evictions rather than white glove service. They were dragging dollies through the foyer, ready to haul my life away to the curb. Sienna followed in their wake, barking orders with the practiced entitlement of someone who had never worked a day for the luxury she demanded. She pointed a manicured finger at the antique credenza my grandmother had left me, instructing the men to shove it into the garage because it clashed with her vision for a modern, minimalist aesthetic. I sat motionless on the velvet sofa in the center of the main living room, the eye of the hurricane. I was not packing. I was not panic-stricken. I was holding a crystal glass filled with a Cabernet that cost more than the suit Derek was wearing. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue as I watched them rearrange a house they did not own. Derek stormed in from the hallway, his face flushing a deep, angry red when he saw me sitting there comfortably. He checked his watch and then glared at me with genuine hatred. He demanded to know why I was not gone yet, shouting that my time was up and asking if I really wanted the humiliation of being dragged out in handcuffs. He looked ridiculous, puffing his chest out like a rooster protecting a coop that belonged to a fox. Sienna sauntered over, resting a hand on his shoulder to calm him, though her eyes were dancing with malice. She smirked at me and suggested that perhaps I was just destitute. She looked at Derek and laughed, saying that maybe I needed money for a bus ticket and told him to toss me a few dollars of loose change so I could leave. It was a cheap shot, designed to belittle me in front of the movers, but it slid off me like water off oil. I offered them a thin, razor-sharp smile. I told them I was not going anywhere just yet because I was expecting company. I explained that a housewarming party for such a distinguished couple surely required an audience, and it would be rude of me to leave before the festivities truly began. Derek did not appreciate the sarcasm. He pulled out his phone and dialed the local precinct. He loudly reported a trespasser at his residence, demanding an immediate patrol car to remove an unwanted individual who was refusing to vacate the premises. He spoke with such authority, completely unaware that the desk sergeant he was yelling at was the nephew of my father's old fishing buddy. He thought he was summoning his personal enforcers, but he was only accelerating his own demise. While we waited for the authorities, Sienna decided to waste no time. She signaled the movers to bring in her own crates, the ones stamped with fragile labels. She began prying them open with a crowbar, revealing the so-called masterpieces she had convinced Derek to finance. She pulled out a twisted mass of rusted metal and proudly declared it was worth $250,000. She caressed the junk like it was a holy relic, praising its raw emotional power. I feigned polite interest. I asked her about the provenance of the piece, inquiring who the artist was. She launched into a rehearsed story about a reclusive genius in Berlin who only sold to a select few, a narrative so full of holes it would not hold water in a kindergarten show and tell. She was confident in her lie, believing I was too uncultured to spot the fraud. Just as she was explaining the deep, metaphorical significance of the rust, the doorbell chimed, a heavy, authoritative sound that echoed through the high ceilings. Derek smirked, straightening his tie. He told me that my ride to the police station had arrived. He marched to the door to let the officers in, eager to see me humiliated. But when he swung the heavy wood door open, the smile froze on his face. It was not the uniformed officers he expected. Standing on the porch were the ghosts of Sienna's past, and they looked very, very angry. Derek stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth slightly open as the anticipated uniformed patrol officers failed to materialize. Instead, Dr. Evans and Mark stepped across the threshold, their expressions grim and determined. Flanking them were two men in nondescript suits who radiated the unmistakable aura of law enforcement, specifically the kind that dealt with white-collar crime and serious fraud. The air in the room shifted instantly from domestic squabble to a suffocating tension. Sienna dropped the piece of rusty metal she had been holding. The clang of it hitting the hardwood floor echoed like a gunshot. Her confident, superior demeanor evaporated the moment she locked eyes with Mark. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and sickly under the expensive studio lights she had just demanded be installed. She stammered, taking a half-step back behind Derek, and tried to force a laugh that sounded more like a choke. She waved her hands frantically and claimed that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding, a scheduling error that could be cleared up with a simple phone call. I did not give her the chance to make that call. I stood up from the sofa, placing my wine glass on the coaster with a deliberate, heavy thud. I tapped the screen of my tablet, activating the command I had programmed earlier. Instantly, the massive television above the fireplace and the screens in the adjacent hallway flickered to life. They did not show a football game or a movie. They displayed a high-definition, complex flowchart I had constructed, tracing the path of every single dollar Sienna had touched in the last year. Derek looked from the strangers in his doorway to the glowing screens, his confusion palpable. He turned on me, his voice rising in a mix of panic and anger. He demanded to know what I was doing and why I was airing dirty laundry in front of guests. He still believed he was the victim of a crazy wife, completely blind to the fact that he was standing in the middle of a crime scene. Mark stepped forward, ignoring Derek completely. He pointed a shaking finger at Sienna and told her that the game was over. He revealed to the room that the exclusive painting she had sold him for $75,000 was not a lost masterpiece from a reclusive genius. He had found the exact same image on a bulk buy website for decorative hotel art, sourced from a flea market in China for less than $50. The frame cost more than the canvas. Before Sienna could spin another lie, Dr. Evans pulled out his phone and hit play on a recording. Sienna's voice, clear and mocking, filled the living room. It was a recording from a dinner party she had attended, where she bragged to a friend that men were stupid creatures who would buy garbage if you slapped a high price tag on it and called it art. She called her investors sheep waiting to be sheared. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek spun around to face Sienna, his eyes wide with betrayal. He asked her if it was true, his voice cracking. He looked like a kicked puppy, waiting for her to tell him it was all a joke. But Sienna saw the walls closing in. The sweet, adoring girlfriend act vanished. She shoved Derek away from her, her face twisting into a snarl. She screamed that it was his fault, that he had pressured her into finding money to fund his lavish lifestyle because his commissions were drying up. She pointed at him and told the officers that Derek was the mastermind and she was just doing what he told her to do. I decided it was time to deliver the final blow to their twisted narrative. I swiped on my tablet, bringing up a new spreadsheet on the main screen. It showed the bank transfers Derek had authorized. I pointed out the routing numbers. The money he thought he was sending to a secured investment trust was actually going directly into a private checking account registered solely to Sarah B. in the Cayman Islands. There was no gallery. There was no investment. He had been directly funding her escape plan. Realizing she had been cornered, Sienna made a desperate move. She lunged toward the open patio doors, shoving a moving box into the path of the detectives, but she was not fast enough. One of the plainclothes officers stepped in her path with practiced ease, blocking her exit and grabbing her arm before she could reach the handle. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, with his lover being detained and his finances exposed as a sham, Derek remained oblivious to his own precarious position. He turned to the police officers, straightened his jacket, and pointed at me. He told them to arrest Sienna if they had to, but then he demanded that they remove me from the premises immediately. He shouted that this was still his house, and he wanted everyone out so he could process what was happening. He truly believed that his name on a mailbox gave him the power to command the law, unaware that the ground beneath him had belonged to me all along. The chaotic scene in my living room seemed to embolden Derek rather than humble him. He watched the officers wrestle Sienna toward the door, and for a split second, he looked relieved that the source of his legal trouble was being removed. He turned back to me, his face twisting into a mask of desperate, territorial aggression. He screamed at the officers to take her away, declaring that he did not care anymore. But then he pointed a shaking finger at me and bellowed that this was still his house. He yelled that I needed to get out immediately because he was done playing games. He scrambled over to the sideboard where he had left his own pile of documents. He grabbed the divorce papers and what he believed was the deed to the house, a blurry photocopy he had likely filched from my filing cabinet years ago without understanding what he was looking at. He slammed the stack of papers onto the glass coffee table with enough force to make the remaining wine in my glass ripple. He shouted that he had the papers to prove it, claiming he had paid the mortgage on this place for 5 years and that made him the owner by law. The back door to the garden opened with a quiet, heavy click. Jameson Ford stepped into the room. He did not look like a man walking into a domestic dispute. He looked like an executioner arriving at the scaffold. He walked past the movers, past the stunned police officers, and placed a thick, weather-beaten leather briefcase on the table right on top of Derek's flimsy photocopies. I looked at my husband with a feeling that was less like anger and more like the pity one feels for a dying insect. I asked him softly if he had never wondered why his name never appeared alone on a single property tax bill. I asked him if he really thought the county clerk just forgot to add him for half a decade. Derek opened his mouth to argue, but Jameson was already moving. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a single, crisp document with a blue legal cover. He signaled to me, and I switched the display on the main television screen one last time. The flowchart of Sienna's fraud vanished, replaced by a high-resolution scan of the original property deed. The header read, "The Sterling Preservation Trust." Jameson cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the room like a knife. He explained that the property known as the Harbor Point Estate was purchased in full by the trust 3 years before Derek and I had even met. He pointed out that the beneficiary of the trust was Veronica Sterling, solely and exclusively Derek stared at the screen, his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to find a loophole that did not exist. He stammered that he paid the mortgage every month and that he had bank statements to prove he transferred $4,000 to the lender. Jameson shook his head slowly. He opened the second file, the prenuptial agreement Derek had signed on a napkin of a cocktail bar because he was too impatient to read the formal draft. Jameson highlighted a specific clause projected on the wall. It stated clearly that any monthly contributions made by the spouse to the household account were classified strictly as living expenses and rental fees, granting no equity or ownership interest in the primary residence. Jameson looked Derek in the eye and delivered the final verdict. He stated that by attempting to evict the owner of the property, Derek had violated the primary clause of his residency agreement. He informed Derek that his lease was effectively terminated as of that moment, and he was no longer a tenant, but a trespasser. The color drained from Derek's face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. He looked down at the floor, then at the expensive leather armchair he was standing next to. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He did not own the house. He did not own the furniture. He did not own the rug beneath his feet. He had spent 5 years paying rent to his own wife to live in a mansion he thought he ruled. From the hallway, a sharp, cruel sound broke the silence. Sienna, despite having her hands cuffed behind her back and a detective gripping her arm, threw her head back and laughed. It was a harsh, mocking cackle. She looked at Derek with pure disgust and said she had thought she was the only crook in the room. But it turned out Derek was just the biggest fool. She sneered that at least she knew she was stealing, whereas Derek was too stupid to know he was just a guest. I was not finished dismantling him yet. With a swipe of my finger on the tablet, the image of the deed vanished, replaced by a live feed of Derek's personal financial standing. The screen was a sea of red warning lights. I explained to the room that his frantic cash withdrawals to fund Sienna's fake gallery had triggered automatic default clauses in his other lines of credit. That cherry red sports car sitting in the driveway, the one he used to intimidate the neighbors, was not his property either. It was a lease, and thanks to his obsession with impressing his mistress, he was 2 months behind on the payments. I told him the repossession team had already been notified and was likely 5 minutes away. But the final nail in the coffin was the email I pulled up next. It was a message sent to his corporate account at 9 o'clock that morning, a message he had missed in his excitement to humiliate me. I read the subject line aloud. It was a notice of immediate termination. As a risk analyst, I had a professional obligation to report suspicious financial behavior, even if it was anonymous. I had sent a detailed dossier to his firm's compliance department regarding his erratic liquidity and potential money laundering risks. He was now unemployed, unemployable, and broke. The weight of reality finally crushed him. The arrogance that had fueled him for years evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man. Derek collapsed, his knees hitting the floor with a heavy thud. He crawled toward me, tears streaming down his face, begging for forgiveness. He grabbed at the air, sobbing that he had been blinded, that Sienna had bewitched him, and that he still loved me. He claimed he was a victim just like me. I looked down at him with zero sympathy and pressed one last button on my control panel. The speakers blasted a recording from 3 nights ago. It was crystal clear. Derek's voice filled the room, laughing as he told Sienna that he could not wait to get rid of the boring old hag he was married to so they could finally live a life of excitement. The audio echoed off the walls. Boring old hag. The Derek on the floor froze, his excuse of being an innocent victim shattered by his own cruel words. By the door, the officers were dragging Sienna out. She was not going quietly. She kicked and screamed, spitting venom at Derek. She yelled that he was a useless, broke loser who had wasted her time. Through the open front door, I could see the entire neighborhood watching. Mrs. Miller was practically leaning over the hedge, and Mr. Johnson stood with his mouth open. They witnessed the glamorous art curator being stuffed into a police cruiser and the lord of the manor weeping on the floor. I turned to the remaining officer and spoke calmly. I stated that since the lease was void, the man on the floor was currently trespassing on private property. I asked them to remove him. Derek let out a wail and lunged for my legs, trying to grab onto me as a lifeline. He never made contact. Jameson's bodyguard, a massive man who had been silent until now, stepped forward and intercepted him. He hoisted Derek up by the back of his expensive suit jacket like he was a misbehaving child and dragged him toward the door. The bodyguard did not handle my husband with care. He marched Derek to the front entrance and shoved him firmly out onto the porch steps, where he stumbled and fell onto the manicured lawn he used to claim was his pride and joy. A single suitcase landed in the grass next to him with a pathetic thud. It was the same overnight bag he had packed for his weekend getaways with Sienna. And now, in a twist of poetic justice that I fully appreciated, it was the only possession he was taking with him. He had given me 24 hours to pack my life into boxes, but I gave him 5 minutes to leave with the clothes on his back. I stepped out onto the porch, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply on the stone. I looked down at him, recreating the exact tableau from earlier that afternoon. Only the roles were now perfectly reversed. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen, searching for a shred of the woman who used to balance his checkbook and soothe his ego. She was gone. In her place stood the landlord he had foolishly tried to evict. Jameson Ford stepped past me, his shadow falling over Derek. He did not offer a hand to help him up. Instead, he dropped a thick envelope onto Derek's chest. It was a court summons. Jameson explained in a voice devoid of warmth that because Derek had used marital funds to finance a felony and had engaged in documented infidelity, the state laws regarding the division of assets were not going to favor him. There would be no alimony. There would be no settlement. He was leaving this marriage with exactly what he brought into it, which was absolutely nothing. Behind me, Dr. Evans and Mark stepped out of the house. The police had already taken Sienna away in a separate vehicle, and the flashing lights were fading down the street. Mark adjusted his jacket and gave me a nod of genuine respect. He told me that while he might never see his $75,000 again, seeing Sienna in handcuffs and Derek in the dirt was a payout he was satisfied with. Dr. Evans shook my hand, thanking me for saving him from further embarrassment and for having the courage to expose the rot. They walked to their cars, leaving Derek alone on the grass. I turned my attention to the audience that was still gathered at the edge of the driveway. The neighbors were practically vibrating with curiosity, whispering behind their hands. I raised my voice just enough to carry across the yard. I announced that the party was officially over and apologized for the noise disturbance. It was a dismissal, sharp and final. Mrs. Miller, unable to help herself, stepped forward from the hedge. She opened her mouth, likely to ask if the house was going to be on the market or if I was okay, masking her gossip hunger with faux concern. I did not give her the satisfaction of an answer. I simply turned around and walked back inside, closing the heavy oak door with a resounding slam that echoed like a gavel strike. Inside the foyer, the moving crew Derek had hired was standing around awkwardly, unsure of what to do now that their employer was sobbing on the front lawn. I looked at the foreman and gave him a new set of instructions. I told him to finish the job Derek had started. I ordered them to take every remaining item that belonged to Derek, his golf clubs, his ugly leather recliner, and his collection of pretentious unread books, and dump them on the curb outside the gate. I told them I would pay them double their hourly rate if the house was purged of his presence within 60 minutes. I walked into the kitchen and picked up the landline. I dialed the priority number for our bank. When the representative answered, I identified myself and requested an immediate freeze on all secondary credit cards attached to my primary account. I listened as the operator confirmed that the card ending in 4028, the one currently in Derek's wallet, was now declined. I hung up the phone and leaned against the counter. The house was quiet. The chaotic energy of the party, the shouting, and the police radio chatter were all gone. It was a deep, profound silence. It did not feel empty or lonely. It felt like the air had finally been cleared of a toxic gas. It was the silence of total, absolute victory. It has been exactly 7 days since the police sirens faded from my driveway, and the silence in my house has never felt more luxurious. I am sitting in my newly renovated home office, a space that, until last week, was Derek's man cave dedicated to video games and mediocrity. The neon beer signs and leather recliners are gone, replaced by sleek bookshelves and a desk that actually commands respect. I finally have room to breathe, both literally and metaphorically. The morning news is still feasting on the scandal. Sienna's face is plastered across every local paper and art blog in the city. The headlines are calling it the Great Gallery Heist, but the part that brings me the most grim satisfaction is how they refer to Derek. They do not call him a mastermind. They refer to him as the naive accomplice, a polite way of saying he was too dim-witted to realize he was being played. It is a public branding of incompetence that will stick to him longer than any criminal record would. He tried to reach out to me yesterday. Since I had blocked his number, he called from a payphone, leaving a frantic voicemail claiming he was sick and had nowhere to go. He sounded pathetic, wheezing and coughing, playing up a flu to gain sympathy. A week ago, I might have worried. Today, I simply deleted the message without listening to the end. The space in my heart that used to house concern for him has been renovated, just like this room. In the quiet of the afternoon, I opened the wall safe to retrieve my passport and found an old letter from my father tucked in the back. I had not read it since the day the trust was signed. In his messy, sprawling handwriting, he wrote that he hoped I would never need the protections he built, but that he feared my generous heart would attract those who wanted to consume rather than contribute. Reading it now, I realized he had seen the truth decades before I did. I had mistaken Derek's dependence for partnership. I had enabled his laziness and called it support. I had let a parasite feed on my success because I was afraid of being alone. That fear is gone now, replaced by a fierce pride in my own resilience. Jameson Ford called me an hour ago with the preliminary divorce ruling. It was a total victory. Because of the ironclad terms of the trust and the proof of Derek's financial infidelity, the judge ruled decisively. I retain 100% ownership of the Harbor Point estate. I keep my car, my savings, and my dignity. Derek gets absolutely nothing. No alimony, no settlement, no severance package for a failed marriage. The justice system is moving just as swiftly for Sienna. She is facing up to 10 years in federal prison for wire fraud and grand larceny. As for Derek, he has lost his job, his reputation, and his home. Rumor has it he has moved back into his mother's basement in the suburbs, sleeping on the same twin mattress he had in high school. He wanted to be a big shot in the art world, but he ended up exactly where he started, a boy who refused to grow up. Tonight, the house is filled with people again, but the atmosphere is entirely different. There are no social climbers or fake neighbors. Dr. Evans and Mark are here, along with my closest girlfriends who never liked Derek to begin with. We are drinking the good wine, the bottles Derek was saving for a special occasion that never came. We are laughing, not at polite jokes, but with the deep, belly-shaking laughter of survivors. I walk over to the bay window and look out at the dark ocean. The waves are crashing against the rocks, steady and powerful. I raise my glass to the reflection in the glass. I am no longer the abandoned wife or the victim of a scam. I am the queen of my own castle, reigning over a kingdom that is finally, truly mine. I take a sip of the wine. It tastes like freedom, expensive and hard-earned, but worth every single penny. Thank you so much for listening to my story and going on this journey with me. Please comment down below telling me where you are listening from, as I would love to read your thoughts and connect with you all. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and press the like button to help this story reach even more people.